About a month ago, I made a video that explained the main issues Embark Studios would have to solve if they make an extraction shooter with no wipes. One of the most popular game mechanics that commenters recommended in order to solve those issues was also the least effective, which got me thinking, why do people think this actually works? And well, let's get into it. Now sometimes curses look like gifts and gifts look like curses. For example, I can sober up really fast. Now you might be asking, where's the downside? Well, considering I've never acquired a taste for beer or wine, maintaining a buzz gets very expensive very fast. And at the end of the night, I'm always the babysitter, herding drunk cats when I go out with friends. Just kidding, I don't have any friends. That's not the point. Point being, overthinking things can often be a curse, but when it comes to understanding game design, it's a real gift. Fortunately, it lets me understand why overly simple suggestions like prestige systems will do very little to solve gear inflation in an extraction shooter. So while we're waiting for an Arc Raider release on October 30th, we have nothing to do but speculate. Now before I get completely rolling, I'm just a guy on YouTube with an opinion. If you disagree with any particular point, that's okay. Make your case down in the comments, keep it civil, and remember, we're all here because we are hyped about Arc Raiders. But the biggest hype goes to Fortuna's Favored. Thank you so much to these legends for supporting the channel. So with that being said, don't get it twisted. I have no doubt Embark will put together a system of solutions that will solve the issues of having no wipes. The full details of which I get into in my previous video, linked above. And because of that, my contention in this video will be that whatever those solutions look like, they won't be relying on a prestige system because it simply wouldn't work. And the truth is, it wouldn't even begin to scratch the surface. But to truly understand why a prestige system isn't the answer, you have to understand the depth of the problem. It's also the answer to another question you might have already asked. Why do I care so much about this specific issue? At the risk of sounding like a broken record,
oh shit, here we go again.
You see, the very core tenet that makes an extraction shooter appealing, or just flat out work as a concept, is tension, which is created by fear of loss, namely the loss of gear, which is often referred to as gear fear. This tension makes every decision, every movement, every engagement exciting because of the potential loss or gain that is always hanging over you. But in order for you to fear this loss, the things you lose have to actually be worth something. The only way you can really create this is by having a level of rarity to said items. And no, I don't mean just slapping a new color frame on it and calling it rare. There are various ways to do this, but the bottom line is that the harder the item is to attain, the more valuable it is. You're going to be way more emotionally engaged when losing or gaining an item that is hard to find than if you're engaging with an item that's readily available. Some players have the misconception that items free flow in and out of circulation, when in reality, items are entering and staying in circulation at a significantly higher rate than they're leaving it. And this exchange isn't close to being equal. Using Arc Raiders as a direct example, every time a new raid is started, the map is populated with all kinds of loot ranging from high-level weapons to random low-level materials. For every raid that begins, you have hundreds if not thousands of items being generated and inserted into the game's potential economy. And the only limiting factor is how much players can carry out successfully. The players that enter also carry with them various loadout items that they either picked up, bought, crafted from other materials, or were given via free loadout system. Even though common items are generated at a higher rate, players will go out of their way to extract rare items and drop common ones. Common items are being used to craft rare items, so even though they're not being generated by the game directly, they're being generated by players. And because the most common way a player dies is to other players, sought after items, aka rare ones, are more likely to stay in circulation because they're the most likely to get looted. The end result is that over a long enough timeline, the game has generated enough items and the majority of players have had the time to acquire enough gear to no longer fear losing any of it. Once this fear is gone, there goes the tension and the real core appeal of the genre. Hitting the reset button in the form of a broad, forced wipe fixes the problem, but only in the short term, and it's not without its own issues, as I've already gotten into before. Many believe that a voluntary self-wipe system, often referred to as a prestige system, would be enough to replace the broad, forced wipes traditionally used in extraction shooters. In fact, so many of you commented this suggestion on that video that it spurred me to make this video you're watching now. And well, what else are we doing until October, right? Anyways, I think this is because the average gamer doesn't realize what a prestige system does is just a drop in the bucket. The first time I interacted with a prestige system was the first Call of Duty Modern Warfare title in 2007. Now, there might have been a game that did this before, but given the popularity of Modern Warfare, I am sure it was the first time many players encountered the system as well. Having worked my account to max level and unlocking all of the attachments and loadouts I wanted, I was met with the choice of resetting and doing it all over again. To which my reaction was, "Ain't nobody got time for that!" Which leads me to the first problem. Players won't use it. Hunt Showdown is the only real example of a prestige system being used in an extraction shooter and is often the example touted when talking about it. I've never once used it, and every player I know has either not used it or stopped using it after a few times. And I know this is anecdotal, but I think it speaks to a pattern that many players will sympathize with. Hunt Showdown plays more like a mix of an extraction shooter and a BR, and has an extremely shallow economy where loot really doesn't matter all that much. So the fact that prestige doesn't get used is very telling. Imagine if loot was more valuable or harder to get, people would need even more motivation to reset themselves. Just a side note, I am aware that Tarkov 1.0 is going to go this route.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
But I feel the dust hasn't quite settled on that situation yet, so I'm going to refrain from commenting on that for now. Which leads me to the root of the issue, motivation. People often couch the prestige suggestion within the frame of, quote, sufficient motivation. The problem is, how do you measure that? I think what they really mean is sufficient motivation for me. But people play for such a wide variety of reasons. How would you create a set of motivators that would appeal to all of them so much that they feel compelled to self-wipe for it? Even with all that being said, I feel like I'm kind of dancing around the real issue anyways, because even if you can get over all of the motivational issues, you have to be so effective at it that you get 80% or more of the player population to utilize said feature at frequent and regular intervals. So let me bust my crayons out for this one, cause
I'm gonna have to science the shit out of this.
But before I display the best PowerPoint you'll want to stab your eyes to, if you're still here, you should consider subscribing. I will continue to put out Arc Raiders oriented content now and after it launches. Guides, gameplay, and currently ongoing podcasts with passionate gamers talking about Arc Raiders. Thanks for your consideration, and now back to the video. With everything I've laid out before in mind, when an extraction shooter releases or begins a wipe, every player starts to accumulate items and bring them into circulation. Common items are more commonly than rare ones, blah blah blah, you get the point. So after about a certain amount of time, each fifth of the player population is going to look roughly like this. Well, in reality it's going to look more like this. Perfectly balanced as all things should be and all that. However, let's fast forward a little bit. After more time has passed, the average player is going to have an even higher proportion of higher level loot. Because remember, players are cherry picking what they extract with, what to craft, and what to leave behind. You can suggest reducing the drop rates and increasing the crafting costs, but this really just slows down the process, not stop it. After another one of these time jumps, it's about the time a wipe would typically happen in a healthy game, resulting in the process resetting and starting all over again. But let's rewind and use the prestige system instead. So at this point, you're going to start getting your first waves of people wanting to prestige. We'll call this group Alpha Wave. And for the sake of argument, I'm going to assume we overcame all the motivational issues. Look at the player population as a whole. There is so much more high-level loot in circulation now than there was when Alpha Wave was first starting out. So when they start trying to reacquire their old stash again, do you think it'll be easier or harder this time around? There are simply more loot pinatas walking around than there was before, so easier was the correct answer. And I'm sure you're saying, okay, whatever, these are high-level sweats, they're always going to mess up the average anyways. And well, true enough, but what about Bravo Wave? The 20% or so of players just below that will trickle their way into prestiging. That problem will exist for them too. And what about the 20% below them? And so forth and so forth. And unless you're optically challenged, you can start to see the problem. Even if you motivate every single last player to prestige, and that's a big if by the way, they're going to all do it at various intervals while everyone else is going to ensure gear inflation happens. When it comes to gear inflation, the key difference between a wipe and a voluntary prestige system isn't the fact that it's voluntary. It's that a wipe happens to the entire economy and the self-wipe only happens to the players who's reinserted into an already inflated economy. So in order for a prestige system to be the primary way of combating gear inflation, you'll need to create enough motivation for the vast majority of players to prestige at constant intervals within close enough timings that the rest of the player base is at some point also trying to regain their stash. That's not asking to solve a hard problem, that's asking for a damn magic trick. Now you can couch a self-wipe mechanic around something else, like a story progression chapter, an event, a clan system, whatever. But that's not really the simple prestige system many have put forth, and that's kind of my point. This problem is going to require layers of solutions that are carefully crafted, not what is effectively a fancy hamster wheel. Now at this point, I feel it would be worthwhile to quickly address some honorable mentions here, the other more common suggestions that were brought forth to address gear inflation. In this case, they were various gear durability types and stash restrictions. Gear durability has been done in various extraction shooters. They are one of the many forms of currency sinks, basically sources for the players to keep their spendable resources in check. These don't really affect gear inflation as much as people think they do. This is no different than just raising the cost of items over a longer timeline. What ends up happening is that players that are really good at acquiring loot don't have problems muscling their way past this, while it can be downright oppressive to everyone else who plays the game. Of course, you can tweak it, but if it's distributed as a general tax on the majority of the player base, and if it's done too harshly, it will have its own negative effects without even solving the gear inflation issue. Now, if I had to come up with my own system, I would do it as an extraction toll fee. The extraction loot you bring in is taxed on its value, but it takes into account the value of your current stash. Now you can modify it to leaning heavier on gear and items you have stacked up a lot of. This way it scales exponentially, but only if you snowball, at which point you can afford it or you can start selling off your items. The other suggestion was to limit stash space so players can't hold on to stacks of gear sets. Let's be real here, the main people who are going to be hurt by this are new players who don't know what to hold on to. Experienced players know what to pick up and know what to leave behind, so they maximize the stash space they do have regardless of how big or small it's going to be. Some have said to increase the stash space as a prestige reward, but that has the reverse problem of giving in-game rewards to the very people who need them the least. At the end of the day, asking a prestige system to do what wipes do is like using a pencil to wipe your ass. It won't do the job and it'll just make a mess. What we need is multiple creative solutions that I am sure Embark will deliver on. And with that being said, I think the answer is clear. What we need are the 3 seashells.
He doesn't know how to use the 3 seashells.
Hit that like, sub, and notification button down below. Check out the membership and Patreon links if you're curious on how to support the channel. And as of the time of this recording, there are still 6 slots available to forever be part of the OG group regardless of how much you donate or sustain for. Thank you so much for watching till the end, and good hunting.